Prince William just dropped a bombshell. Meghan Markle tried something no one saw coming. In an exclusive revelation, the Duke of Cambridge exposes a move by Meghan that shocked the royal family to its core. This isn't just palace gossip. It threatens to reshape the future of the monarchy itself. Today, we dive deep into what Meghan actually attempted behind closed doors, why it caught everyone off guard, and what this means for Prince William, the Queen, and the legacy of the crown. Stay with us, because this story is only getting more explosive. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It began with whispers, barely audible, tucked into the crevices of online forums and speculative tabloids. The kind of whispers you hear once and immediately discard. Too outlandish, too impossible. But, as with all things buried in the royal world, time and truth have a way of clawing their way to the surface. And now, a revelation so shocking, so entirely unexpected, has erupted into public view with enough force to send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and beyond. For the first time ever, Prince William, heir to the British throne, future king, and one of the most tightly controlled public figures on earth, has allegedly come forward with a claim that redefines every previous narrative involving Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. A claim that she, during her time as a working royal, attempted something so unthinkable, so dangerous to the monarchy's carefully cultivated image, that insiders are reportedly scrambling to do damage control even as you watch this video. The world has come to know Meghan Markle in a number of roles, as an actress, a humanitarian, a modern woman fighting archaic royal traditions, and, more recently, as a divisive figure who stepped back from the royal family alongside Prince Harry. But never has she been associated with this kind of claim, that she allegedly attempted to initiate an intimate relationship with Prince William himself. According to sources close to the prince, and corroborated in part by leaks now circulating through royal insider channels, Meghan didn't just express admiration or harmless flirtation. No. These insiders allege that she forced herself on William in a moment of power imbalance and confusion, long before the walls between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family officially cracked. What makes this even more unsettling is the timeline. If these accounts are accurate, the alleged incident occurred when Meghan was still freshly installed as a working royal, newly married to Prince Harry, and still being cautiously embraced by the institution. This wasn't a scenario of detached relationships or fractured family dynamics. This was the honeymoon phase of the Fab Four, that short-lived media fantasy which painted William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan as the new face of modern monarchy. Public appearances showed harmony, smiles, teamwork. But now, behind that facade, another picture is emerging. A dark and uncomfortable truth lurking beneath the surface, shielded by palace walls, spun by press teams, and sealed under royal discretion. How did we get here? How does an institution that has survived world wars, abdications, scandals, and divorces now face an accusation that is both intensely personal and politically radioactive? The royal family is no stranger to turmoil. From Edward VIII's abdication to Princess Diana's explosive interviews, to Prince Andrew's catastrophic associations, every generation has faced its reckoning. But this strikes at the heart of the family's integrity. And unlike other controversies, this one isn't about the past catching up with them. It's about present-day betrayal, laced with power dynamics, sexual undertones, and the possibility of manipulation at the highest level. The timing of the leak is no accident. In the last few months, the once bulletproof image of Meghan Markle has begun to show cracks. Public opinion, once squarely on her side during the Megxit media frenzy, has grown more critical. Questions about the authenticity of her and Harry's motives, their Netflix deals, the Spotify debacle, and allegations of bullying staff have all left her credibility somewhat bruised. But even her most hardened critics never imagined a story of this magnitude. It defies the normal rhythm of scandal. It's not financial impropriety, nor is it a difference of opinion over protocol. It's intimate. It's invasive. And it suggests a disturbing level of recklessness from someone who was, at the time, still navigating the corridors of royal trust. Insiders claim that Prince William kept this secret guarded for years, not out of weakness, but because of what it could mean for his brother, for his family, and for the monarchy itself. The implication of betrayal cuts deeper than personal discomfort. If made public earlier, the claim could have detonated the already fragile relationship between the brothers, or worse, created a constitutional crisis. Imagine, for a moment, if this had come to light while the Queen was still alive. The optics alone of a duchess allegedly making advances on the future king would have been catastrophic. Instead, William allegedly chose silence, choosing duty over exposure, brotherhood over confrontation. But now, as the political and emotional dust settles from years of royal drama, something has changed. William, known for his composure, is said to have reached a breaking point. Multiple sources suggest that the leak of this revelation did not happen by accident, but rather with his quiet, indirect consent. Why now? Because according to these sources, William believes the public has a right to know who they were really dealing with and what kind of chaos was allegedly being sown inside palace walls under the guise of progressive reform. This introduction isn't just about setting the scene. It's about preparing you for a journey into one of the most secretive, explosive chapters in royal history. As we move forward in this video, we will dive deep into everything: the alleged incident itself, where and when it took place, how William responded in the moment, and what steps were taken afterward to bury the story. We'll explore the psychological landscape of all key players involved, from Meghan's ambition and Harry's blind loyalty, to William's increasing disillusionment with what was supposed to be a united family front. And no, this isn't just tabloid gossip rehashed with dramatic music. Our investigation is based on a growing chorus of insiders, royal aides, former palace staff, unofficial biographers, and former media advisors, many of whom are speaking now precisely because they can no longer tolerate the manipulation of the public narrative. Some are motivated by principle, others by guilt, still others by a desire for revenge. But whatever the motive, their accounts are beginning to form a cohesive, disturbing picture that cannot be ignored. Already, reaction behind palace doors is said to be swift and panicked. Advisors are reportedly scrambling to preempt any legal or reputational fallout, while the Sussex camp remains largely silent, issuing no formal response, no rebuttal, not even a denial through unofficial channels. That silence is deafening. It is not just the absence of a defense, it's the echo chamber of a narrative that, so far, they are unable or unwilling to control. As you watch this unfold, you may begin to ask yourself, what kind of institution allows this to happen behind closed doors? How many secrets remain buried in the foundations of royalty? And what does it say about Meghan Markle, not the woman we saw on Oprah, not the carefully packaged humanitarian, but the woman described by insiders who were there, watching her navigate the palace with calculated grace and, allegedly, a dangerous disregard for boundaries? This video doesn't just challenge the public image of a duchess. It challenges everything we think we know about power, loyalty, and what happens when ambition collides with royal protocol. Buckle up, because what comes next isn't just history, it's heresy in the House of Windsor. The grandeur of Kensington Palace at night is something only a few will ever truly experience. Behind the cold stone walls and storied history, the atmosphere inside is markedly different from the image projected to the outside world. Staff move with the quiet efficiency of a luxury hotel. Security patrols in discreet but strict shifts. And in the inner quarters, the personal lives of Britain's most scrutinized family unfold, mostly in private, rarely leaking into the public view. But according to multiple insiders, it was within these walls, on a night that had once been scheduled as a private gathering between the so-called Fab Four, that the unthinkable allegedly occurred. And what happened that night would ripple through the royal household with consequences that were both immediate and long-lasting. The evening began as many did in those early days following Harry and Meghan's wedding. There was still optimism in the air, at least publicly. Prince William and Catherine had extended an invitation to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for what aides described as a low-key evening to reconnect. The brothers had grown slightly distant since Meghan entered the picture, but it wasn't yet the deep chasm we see today. The intention was to rebuild, to bond as couples, and perhaps most crucially, to test whether a true partnership between the two households could emerge. Aides were told to minimize interference. No press briefings. No staff in attendance unless necessary. Just four royals, away from the cameras, trying to bridge a growing gap. But insiders now claim that this evening, meant for healing, quickly turned awkward. According to one source familiar with the couple's inner circle, Meghan arrived in a noticeably different mood than usual. She was dressed to impress, far more than the casual setting seemed to require. She was animated, more forward than usual, and unusually fixated on William, asking detailed questions about his personal preferences, his routine, even his childhood memories. At first, it could have been interpreted as innocent curiosity or even a misguided attempt to bond with her brother-in-law. But the tone, according to those present, shifted uncomfortably. One aide who spoke under the condition of anonymity described the setting as unbalanced and tense. Catherine reportedly tried to steer the conversation toward neutral territory, topics like charity initiatives and upcoming appearances, but Meghan allegedly kept turning her attention back to William. She teased him lightly about his formality, about how he was too proper, and that he needed to loosen up, to learn how to have a bit of fun. At one point, she is said to have leaned in too close, prompting William to shift away slightly. Catherine, according to a former royal staff member familiar with the incident, stiffened and became noticeably quieter as the evening wore on. The breaking point, however, came later in the evening, with Catherine having momentarily stepped out, perhaps to check on their children or speak to a staff member. Meghan and William were briefly alone. According to two separate accounts that have since emerged from individuals once part of the royal household, Meghan allegedly approached William in a manner that crossed the boundaries of familial affection. She made a comment about how it must be lonely being the future king, and followed it with what the sources claim was an attempt at physical contact, reaching for his hand or possibly brushing against him in a way that was unmistakably inappropriate given their relationship. William's reaction was immediate and cold. The insiders claim he pulled back and firmly asked Meghan what she thought she was doing. At that moment, the atmosphere reportedly changed entirely. Meghan, appearing unbothered, laughed it off and tried to downplay it, suggesting that William was too uptight and reading too much into things. But he didn't laugh. According to one staffer, William left the room shortly after, visibly shaken, and Catherine returned to find attention so palpable it could not be ignored. The rest of the evening ended quickly. Politeness returned, but the warmth had vanished. William, known for his ability to maintain composure even under immense pressure, allegedly maintained only the thinnest veneer of civility. The Sussexes left shortly after, and no one spoke about the incident, at least not publicly. But privately, it left a scar that would never fully heal. Over the weeks that followed, subtle shifts occurred. Scheduled joint engagements between the couples were quietly reduced. Public appearances grew more strained. And behind the scenes, staff began whispering about what had happened. Some dismissed it as an exaggeration, a misinterpretation. Others, particularly those close to William and Catherine, believed it was a deliberate test of boundaries, possibly even a power play on Meghan's part. One particularly compelling piece of information came from a former communications officer who claims to have been briefed about the event not long after it occurred. This individual, who had worked for both households at various points, said the incident was described internally as the night everything changed. While it was never officially logged or written up in palace records, it became a turning point in how William and Catherine viewed Meghan, not just as a disruptive force, but as a potential threat to the integrity of the family itself. The bigger question remains, why would Meghan do such a thing? If the allegations are true, some point to her growing frustration with royal hierarchy and protocol. In multiple interviews and reports, Meghan has expressed how stifled she felt within the rigid royal system. Others suggest it was less about rebellion and more about control, an attempt to challenge William's authority or test how far her influence could go. There are even darker theories. A few insiders speculate that the move was strategic, an attempt to destabilize the tight bond between the brothers. If Meghan could insert herself into that dynamic in a disruptive way, intentionally or not, it might grant her more leverage within the family. By creating friction between William and Harry, she could, according to these theories, deepen Harry's dependence on her and push the couple further away from the institution, something that ultimately happened months later. What's more chilling is the silence that followed. William, according to sources, never spoke of the incident again, not to the Queen, not to Charles, not even to senior advisors. His approach was to bury it, to protect the family's image, and, perhaps more importantly, to spare Harry the fallout. But the damage was done. From that moment forward, William reportedly began to see Meghan not as a misguided outsider, but as someone whose presence could bring down everything the royal family had worked to preserve. In the following months, decisions were made that, in hindsight, reflected this new dynamic. William and Catherine began to prioritize their own household, distancing themselves from the joint charitable initiatives that once included Harry and Meghan. Meetings between the brothers were filtered through aides. trust eroded. And while the public saw only the surface-level disagreements, the passive-aggressive interviews, the changing living arrangements, those within the palace knew the real story was far more volatile. Even now, years later, the palace refuses to comment on this alleged incident. But those who were present that night, or briefed soon after, speak of it with the kind of solemnity usually reserved for national scandals. They know what it meant, and more importantly, they know what it cost. That one evening at Kensington Palace may have been the tipping point, the moment when reconciliation became impossible, when the royal rift became a permanent chasm. The true tragedy, some argue, is not the act itself, but the silence that followed. William, forever the steady heir, bore the weight of that night alone. And Meghan, whether through arrogance or calculation, walked away as though nothing had happened. The families went on smiling for the cameras, but trust had been shattered. And in the House of Windsor, once trust is broken, the fallout is inevitable. This was the night that changed everything. And as the truth now begins to surface, the world is finally beginning to understand just how deep the betrayal ran. And how long the royal family worked to keep it buried. Long before the world came to know the bitter divide between Prince William and Prince Harry, there existed a bond that many believed was unbreakable. The image of the two brothers walking side by side at their mother Princess Diana's funeral in 1997 became etched into the public consciousness, a symbol of resilience, solidarity, and brotherhood. In the decades that followed, despite the pressures of royal life and the weight of public scrutiny, their relationship remained steadfast, grounded in mutual trauma, shared duty, and a genuine affection that seemed to defy the cold expectations of royalty. But that closeness, it appears, was far more fragile than the public ever knew. And when it finally began to fracture, it did so not with a singular explosion, but through a series of small, painful betrayals, each more significant than the last. For most of their lives, William and Harry complemented one another. William, the eldest, always carried the burden of future kingship, stoic, cautious, and ever aware of his place in the grand design of the monarchy. Harry, in contrast, was freer, more impulsive, and often described as the spare, a title that afforded him greater flexibility but less certainty. Their roles were distinct, but their mutual love and loyalty kept them united. Whether it was through shared military service, charitable work, or the light-hearted banter that frequently played out in public appearances, they were a duo many thought could weather anything. The first real signs of strain appeared not with Meghan's arrival, but earlier, during the later years of William's courtship with Catherine Middleton. Harry was deeply fond of Catherine and reportedly sought her advice on many occasions, but her entrance into William's life, and the increasing responsibilities that came with it, meant less time for the brothers. William was becoming a family man, a future king-in-waiting, while Harry found himself slowly edged out from their inner circle. According to a former palace advisor, Harry expressed on several occasions a sense of being left behind, not due to neglect, but because of circumstance. William was growing into his role, and Harry, without a clear path, was adrift. The situation worsened once Meghan Markle entered the picture. From the outset, William was cautious. He didn't object to the relationship itself, but he raised questions about the pace and intensity of it all. Meghan, a divorced American actress with a complex media history, was not the traditional choice for a senior royal. But more than her background, it was her approach that troubled William. She was assertive, opinionated, and unafraid to challenge palace protocols. William reportedly urged Harry to slow things down, to consider the implications of marrying someone who seemed, at least to him, unfamiliar with, and potentially incompatible with, royal life. This advice, intended perhaps as brotherly concern, was received by Harry as a deep betrayal. According to one source within the palace, Harry viewed William's caution not as care but as condescension. He felt his brother was judging Meghan unfairly, not giving her a chance to prove herself. The conversation, which began as a private chat over lunch, reportedly ended in raised voices. From that point forward, something essential broke between them. The problem wasn't just about Meghan. It was about identity and loyalty. For Harry, William represented the very institution he had begun to question. And when it seemed like his brother, the one person he believed would always have his back, had taken the side of the system, it left him feeling isolated. For William, Harry's growing defensiveness and seeming unwillingness to consider any advice only confirmed his fears that Meghan's influence was pulling his brother away from the family and toward a world of confrontation and self-promotion. Over the months that followed, the divide became increasingly evident. Meetings once held as a family became more formal, more strained. William and Catherine reportedly felt blindsided by many of Harry and Meghan's decisions, including their high-profile interviews and their penchant for making public statements that veered dangerously close to royal critique. One royal aide described the situation as walking a tightrope with a gust of wind constantly threatening to blow everyone off balance. The tension spilled into staff dynamics as well. Those working for William and Catherine began to clash with Meghan and Harry's team. Accusations of bullying, miscommunication, and even sabotage began to circulate. Rumors of an unbridgeable divide between the two households gained traction in the media, and while official statements insisted all was well, the truth behind the scenes was far messier. Meetings were missed, phone calls ignored, and joint appearances became exercises in choreographed discomfort. Perhaps the most heartbreaking development was the emotional distance that began to define William and Harry's interactions. According to several insiders, they stopped speaking regularly, relying on intermediaries to convey messages. When they did speak, it was tense, measured, and often punctuated by silence. Catherine, once seen as a bridge between the brothers, was reportedly devastated. She had always viewed Harry as a younger sibling and hoped that time would heal the wounds. But the damage had compounded. Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, along with Meghan, was the final rupture. For William, it was a dereliction of duty. For Harry, it was liberation. Their conflicting perspectives made reconciliation nearly impossible. While Harry viewed the move as a necessary escape from a toxic environment, William saw it as an abandonment, not just of the family, but of the country. The lack of coordination and the surprise announcement sent shockwaves through the palace, and many blamed Harry for blindsiding the Queen and Charles. William, according to sources, was furious. Not just because of what happened, but because of how it happened, with no warning, no discussion, and no regard for the institution that had shaped them both. In private, William reportedly described feeling gutted. He missed his brother, missed the laughter, the support, and the shared history. But he also felt betrayed. And betrayal, in William's world, is not easily forgiven. Public appearances since then have done little to dispel the notion of a deep rift. Even at solemn occasions like Prince Philip's funeral and the Queen's Jubilee, the physical distance between the brothers mirrored the emotional chasm that had opened. Their body language, once so naturally in sync, now appeared rigid and rehearsed. Photographers searched for signs of a thaw, but what they captured instead was the painful reality of a brotherhood broken by pride, circumstance, and conflicting truths. And yet, beneath the bitterness lies a shared vulnerability. Both men were shaped by the same tragedy, raised in the same shadows, and forced into roles that neither fully chose. They are, in many ways, two sides of the same coin. William, bound by duty and legacy. Harry, driven by emotion and the quest for authenticity. The pain between them is real, but so is the love that once defined their relationship. What remains now is uncertainty. Can the bond be repaired? Or has the damage been too great? Friends of the family remain divided. Some believe time will heal, that fatherhood and the inevitability of aging will bring perspective. Others are less hopeful, pointing to the public airing of grievances and the seemingly permanent relocation of Harry's life to a different continent as signs that reconciliation may never come. What is clear, however, is that the world has lost something profound in the unraveling of William and Harry's relationship. In them, many saw a new chapter for the monarchy, modern, relatable, and united. Instead, we've been given a cautionary tale about how power, identity, and misunderstanding can fracture even the strongest of bonds. And behind every headline, every leaked story, and every carefully worded statement, there are two brothers who once swore to protect each other against the world, only to find themselves, heartbreakingly, on opposite sides of it. For years, whispers had lingered in the margins of British society, idle speculation tossed around at dinner parties and internet forums alike, steeped in mystery and tinged with scandal. The idea that Prince William might not be the biological son of King Charles III was, for many, an outlandish conspiracy theory, salacious tabloid fodder with no grounding in reality. And yet, in the privacy of palace walls and the hushed circles of the aristocracy, the rumors refused to die. Most were dismissed. Some were angrily denied. But in the end, one simple, undeniable truth shattered decades of illusion: a DNA test. The revelation didn't begin with Prince William. It began, ironically, with a separate legal matter a quiet but insistent legal challenge lodged against a media company in possession of previously unreleased letters and personal recordings involving the late Princess Diana. Among the cache of material were journal entries and audio tapes Diana had recorded in the years following her separation from Prince Charles. These items, long withheld from public release due to privacy concerns, had become a point of legal contention. But when legal proceedings unearthed new evidence, including Diana's own handwritten reference to the truth William must know one day, alarm bells rang behind palace gates. Initially, the royal family's legal team tried to block the dissemination of the material. Their argument rested on privacy and national security, standard fare when shielding royal correspondence. But one particular letter, authenticated by multiple handwriting experts and preserved in a private estate previously managed by one of Diana's closest confidants, made its way into evidence. In that letter, Diana hinted at a brief but emotionally complex relationship she had maintained in the late 1980s, one that overlapped with her official marriage to Prince Charles. The tone of the letter was not confessional, but cautionary, and it revealed that Diana had long feared the truth might surface under hostile circumstances. What followed was a carefully orchestrated, behind-the-scenes inquiry involving the palace, the legal teams, and eventually Prince William himself. Initially, William refused to participate. The very idea was not only deeply offensive, but potentially destabilizing. But when the evidentiary material was laid out before him, Diana's unmistakable voice, her handwriting, her haunting concern for his future, something shifted. He agreed, reluctantly, to undergo private DNA testing, under the condition that it be handled with utmost discretion. The test itself was simple, a routine cheek swab, cross-referenced with multiple known samples from King Charles, and compared against archived genetic material verified to belong to Princess Diana. The process took weeks, with data checked, rechecked, and peer-reviewed by independent experts to rule out any possibility of error or manipulation. When the results finally arrived, they detonated like a bomb at the heart of the monarchy. The conclusion was irrefutable. Prince William's DNA did not match King Charles's on the paternal line. In genetic terms, they were not father and son. For William, the revelation was cataclysmic. A man who had spent his life preparing for the throne, living under the weight of duty, tradition, and expectation, was suddenly untethered from the very bloodline that justified it all. His sense of identity, once so assured, now fractured. He wasn't just the future king. He was the heir to a legacy built on a lie. And perhaps worst of all, he now had to grapple with the implications of that truth while the world still saw him as something he no longer was. The immediate reaction inside the palace was one of panic. Damage control teams were mobilized. Advisors scrambled to decide whether the information could be contained. Meetings were held in secret chambers, with senior members of the royal family, legal advisors, and MI5 liaisons deliberating the best course of action. Should the results be destroyed, denied, discredited, or, unthinkably, acknowledged? Charles's reaction was more complicated. According to insiders, he had long harbored suspicions but never confronted them directly. Whether out of love for Diana, fear of scandal, or blind hope, he had chosen not to seek the truth. But when the DNA results were presented to him, he reportedly fell into a stunned silence. Witnesses describe him as deeply shaken, not merely because the results confirmed the rumors, but because they stripped him of something emotionally irreplaceable, the belief that William was truly his son, not just in title but in essence. Privately, Charles insisted that his love for William would not change, regardless of biology. He maintained that William was his son in every way that mattered. But behind closed doors, cracks formed. Trust was eroded. Conversations turned cold. And William, already reeling from the shock, now found himself alienated from the very man he had believed to be his father. The man who had raised him, shaped him, and criticized him, suddenly became a stranger. Then came the question of who William's biological father truly was. The palace, in a rare moment of coordination, launched a separate private investigation. DNA comparisons were made with known associates of Diana's from the 1980s. Among the possibilities were several well-documented individuals, military officers, old family friends, and the one name that had always haunted the tabloids, Major James Hewitt. Hewitt had long denied being William's father. Public scrutiny had driven him into retreat, and despite his past affair with Diana, The timeline had always seemed to discredit the possibility. Yet the media never let go of the narrative, and now, with the monarchy itself in a state of genetic crisis, the possibility was reopened. But testing soon ruled him out. William's DNA did not match Hewitt's in any significant way. Other names were floated, quietly and with great caution. Some cooperated. Others refused. But one match did come through, an obscure but confirmed relative of a man Diana had once confided in privately, a man whose identity has yet to be publicly disclosed, but who had remained close to her during her most turbulent years. That man is now at the center of the storm, his connection to William known only to a select few, and his name buried beneath a pile of legal threats and confidentiality agreements. For William, the knowledge is both a curse and a key. A curse because it undoes the narrative he spent his life believing. A key because it gives him a kind of truth he never asked for but cannot now unknow. In the weeks following the revelation, insiders report that he became increasingly withdrawn. He stopped attending briefings. He canceled several public engagements. Those closest to him say he was consumed by grief, not for a lost father, but for the loss of certainty. The monarchy, ever invested in optics and tradition, attempted to weather the storm by doubling down on its usual tools: silence, continuity, and distraction. Public statements remained upbeat. Photos of William with Charles were recycled and recirculated. Meanwhile, inside palace walls, relationships frayed. Prince Harry, upon learning of the DNA results, reportedly reacted with a mix of shock and sorrow. While he and William had grown distant over the years, the truth about Charles's paternity of William recontextualized their entire childhood. Everything, the favoritism, the differing expectations, the strange inconsistencies, now made a new kind of sense. Harry reached out to his brother in what one insider described as the most genuine outreach in years, but the call went unanswered. The timing of the DNA revelation couldn't have been worse. With Charles in ill health and the public growing increasingly skeptical of the monarchy's relevance, the notion that the heir apparent was not the biological son of the monarch raised constitutional questions of unprecedented scale. Legal scholars debated whether biology truly mattered in a monarchy built on tradition, not science. But in the court of public opinion, the damage was done. If William was not Charles's son, then what was he? And who, exactly, held the true right to ascend the throne? These questions continue to haunt the institution. And as silence stretches on, the weight of withheld truth only grows heavier. Within Buckingham Palace, a new narrative is quietly forming, one that tries to assert that legitimacy does not rest solely on blood, but on service, dignity, and public support. But that message, noble though it may be, cannot erase the raw fact of what has been uncovered. Prince William, the man raised to be king, must now face a future built on uncertainty. His place in history is forever altered. The truth, once buried beneath decades of silence, has finally come to light. And its consequences are only beginning to unfold. The shockwaves of the DNA revelation that Prince William was not King Charles's biological son did not stop with the prince himself. They rippled outward, shaking the very pillars of the British monarchy. Inside palace walls, long-buried tensions were reawakened. Outside, the monarchy's already fragile image teetered on the edge of a public relations catastrophe. The response from the royal family was immediate, intense, and deeply fractured. Queen Camilla, already regarded by some as an uneasy figure within the monarchy, responded with fury cloaked in icy decorum. According to palace aides, Camilla was not merely shocked by the news, she felt betrayed. For years, she had stood by Charles, defending his legacy, his choices, and his claim to the throne. The idea that William, the future king she had tried to embrace despite past grievances, was not Charles's son sent her into what one source described as an internal spiral of fury. She reportedly confronted Charles in private, demanding answers not only about the DNA results but about why she had been kept in the dark all these years. Her reaction was compounded by a deeper fear, the survival of her legacy. Camilla had spent decades clawing her way toward public acceptance, a slow journey from public pariah to queen consort. Now, everything she had invested in, her status, her power, her proximity to the crown, was in jeopardy. If William was not Charles's son, what did that make her? A symbolic figure tied to a lineage that had just unraveled. Meanwhile, Charles himself remained ensnared in a storm of mixed emotions. To the public, he continued to play the part of a king calm, reflective, and resolute. But those close to him described a man in torment. He was not just dealing with a scandal, he was mourning the loss of something sacred. His identity as a father, long taken for granted, had been forcibly revised. His legacy, meticulously curated through decades of royal duty, was suddenly out of his control. Sources within Clarence's house revealed that Charles had gone through several stages in the days following the test results. First came denial. A desperate refusal to believe that William wasn't his. Then, when the science could no longer be ignored, came guilt. He agonized over what he might have done differently, whether he should have asked questions earlier, whether Diana had ever intended to tell him the truth. But perhaps most profoundly, Charles was consumed by fear. Fear that the monarchy he had dedicated his life to preserving might crumble under the weight of this revelation. Private meetings were held almost daily in the weeks following the DNA results. Key members of the royal inner circle gathered to formulate a response. The options were grim. One school of thought advocated for complete denial, to bury the results, discredit the source, and push forward with the existing narrative. Another faction, led quietly by a handful of modernizers within the palace, argued that openness was the only path forward. The public, they said, would eventually learn the truth. Better to control the narrative now than suffer a catastrophic leak later. Prince Harry, operating largely from abroad, was not initially included in these meetings. However, when news of the DNA test reached him, he was reportedly devastated. His relationship with William had been cold for years, strained by public feuds, the Oprah interview, and ongoing litigation. But this news hit differently. The man he had grown up with, whom he had once called his closest ally, was now facing the kind of identity crisis Harry knew all too well. The tables had turned. It wasn't Harry who was now the black sheep, it was William. According to sources close to the Sussex household, Harry attempted to reach out to William in a series of private messages. The tone was neither gloating nor smug. It was raw, empathetic. For once, he understood exactly how it felt to be adrift in the institution, to question one's place in a family governed by titles and duty. But William, consumed by grief and distrustful of his brother's motives, did not respond. The silence between them grew even more deafening. Catherine, Princess of Wales, was another key figure caught in the maelstrom. Always the portrait of composure and grace, Kate found herself in a position she had never imagined. Her husband, the man she had built a life and family with, was not the son of the king. Overnight, her future as queen consort became legally and symbolically unstable. According to insiders, Kate's primary concern was not for titles or inheritance, but for their children. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been raised with a certain narrative about their heritage and destiny. Now, that narrative had been shattered. Kate took on the role of protector. She focused her energy on the children, shielding them from the media, avoiding discussions that might lead to confusion or fear. But behind the scenes, she too was struggling. Her relationship with William entered a tense phase marked by long silences, difficult conversations, and the sobering realization that their path forward might be dramatically different than they had planned. She stood by him, but the emotional toll was evident. Elsewhere in the royal household, reactions varied depending on proximity to power. Princess Anne, known for her blunt honesty and loyalty to the institution, reportedly viewed the entire situation as a dangerous distraction. She believed the monarchy should weather this storm with stoicism and move on. Blood doesn't make a royal, she is said to have stated during a private family dinner. Duty does. Her stance reflected an old-school view, one that prioritized stability over sentiment, tradition over truth. Prince Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, were more subdued in their response. They expressed concern over the fallout and made efforts to support Charles in private, but remained largely on the periphery of the crisis. Their role, as always, was to provide support without stepping into the fire. Behind the scenes, palace courtiers and advisors scrambled to assess the legal and constitutional implications. Could William still ascend the throne if he wasn't biologically related to Charles? Technically, yes, as he remained a legitimate son of Diana, who was married to Charles at the time of William's birth. Under British law, legitimacy is not defined strictly by DNA but by marital context. However, the question of perception was another matter entirely. The monarchy, though steeped in law, is powered by symbolism. If the public ceased to view William as the rightful heir, the institution itself could face an existential crisis. Trust, once broken, is hard to repair. And the palace knew it. So, a strategy was quietly put into motion. First, the royal press office issued a statement reaffirming William's role and importance to the monarchy, carefully avoiding any direct mention of the rumors. Then came a coordinated public appearance. Charles, William, and Kate attending a charity gala together, smiling for cameras, delivering speeches, shaking hands. The message was clear. Nothing had changed. But of course, everything had changed. Insiders reported that behind those smiling photographs were three deeply wounded individuals. Charles, carrying the weight of revelation. William, buried in confusion and rage. Kate, holding the family together with quiet, desperate resolve. Their unity was a performance, necessary, polished, but deeply fragile. In private, the pressure was immense. Charles was reportedly encouraged to make a private acknowledgement to William to reaffirm his love, regardless of blood. Whether this meeting occurred is unknown, but some sources claim that Charles did attempt to reach out, only to be met with a carefully worded but distant response. William was no longer the obedient son. He was a man questioning everything, and trust, once broken, is not easily mended. Meanwhile, public sentiment began to shift. Polls showed rising curiosity about the paternity issue, despite the palace's silence. Hashtags trended. Speculation swirled. Some monarchists defended William, emphasizing his character, his service, his popularity. Others saw the revelation as proof that the monarchy was built on illusion, and that perhaps it was time to let that illusion die. Republican groups seized the moment. Petitions calling for a referendum on the monarchy gained traction. Op-eds in major newspapers questioned the future of royal succession. And all the while, William remained silent, caught in the crossfire between loyalty and truth. In the weeks that followed, the palace entered a new phase of quiet crisis management. Media briefings were controlled. Staff were instructed not to engage in any discussion of the DNA test. And William, while still appearing at official events, noticeably limited his public comments. A plan was eventually drafted, one that included contingencies for every possible outcome. A formal statement denying the rumors, should they leak. A legal challenge to any publication that attempted to release the DNA results. And, perhaps most crucially, a path toward rehabilitation, one that emphasized William's upbringing, values, and dedication to service rather than biology. Because in the end, the question was no longer about science. It was about symbolism. Could the British people continue to believe in a monarchy whose central figure had been built on a secret? For the royal family, the road ahead was uncertain. The foundation had cracked. The illusion was threatened. And the truth, once unearthed, could never be buried again. The moment news of the DNA revelation leaked outside palace walls, the media frenzy exploded with unprecedented intensity. The British tabloids, long known for their voracious appetite for royal drama, seized the story like a wildfire on dry grass. Front pages screamed with headlines that mingled shock, scandal, and speculation. The global press quickly followed, with news outlets across Europe, North America, and Asia dedicating airtime and column inches to dissecting every aspect of the unfolding saga. Inside the media rooms of London's most influential papers, the story was treated as the scoop of the century. Reporters scrambled to verify sources, to track down insiders willing to speak on the record or off it. A small cadre of investigative journalists worked tirelessly, piecing together timelines, interviewing royal aides, former staff members, and acquaintances from the prince's childhood. The question on everyone's lips was simple. What did this mean for the monarchy's future? Social media added fuel to the fire. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook became battlegrounds for debates, rumors, and conspiracy theories. Hashtags like hashtag William Not Charles' Son and hashtag Royal DNA Test trended for days. Influencers, celebrities, and ordinary users weighed in, their opinions ranging from scandalized disbelief to sarcastic dismissal to outright calls for abolition of the monarchy. The story transcended traditional news cycles, becoming a viral cultural phenomenon that commanded attention from people who otherwise might never have followed royal affairs. One of the most striking aspects of the media storm was the split in tone between different outlets. On one hand, respected broadsheets like The Guardian and The Times approached the story with a measured tone, emphasizing the constitutional and historical ramifications and carefully avoiding sensationalism. On the other hand, tabloid giants like The Sun and the Daily Mail embraced full-blown tabloid hysteria, publishing lurid accounts of alleged affairs, secret rendezvous, and palace intrigues that had supposedly led to the DNA revelation. In America, the story captured widespread fascination, with major networks devoting primetime segments to expert panels debating the implications. Shows like Good Morning America and CNN's The Lead featured royal correspondents who unpacked the nuances of royal succession law, the personal drama within the House of Windsor, and the potential fallout for Commonwealth countries that recognize the British monarch as head of state. Across the pond in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, monarchists expressed deep concern, fearing that this scandal could hasten Republican movements in their own countries. Meanwhile, Republican activists seized the moment to renew calls for national referendums on the monarchy's future, emboldened by the narrative of a royal family fractured by secrets and lies. Public opinion polls conducted in the wake of the revelations revealed a complex picture. While a majority of Britons expressed sympathy toward Prince William and skepticism about the monarchy's ability to handle the crisis, a significant minority called for drastic reform or even abolition of the monarchy. Interestingly, support for William personally remained relatively strong, highlighting the difference between loyalty to an individual and to the institution as a whole. The palace's media team found itself overwhelmed and increasingly reactive rather than proactive. Their initial strategy of denial and downplaying the significance of the DNA test quickly unraveled under the relentless barrage of questions and leaks. Press briefings became tense affairs, with royal spokespeople dodging or deflecting inquiries, further fueling media suspicion. In an unprecedented move, anonymous palace insiders began leaking confidential information to journalists, either out of frustration, opportunism, or a desire to influence the narrative. These leaks painted a picture of a palace gripped by internal chaos, with factions divided over how to proceed and trust eroding between key players. The most damaging leaks came from individuals close to Prince William, revealing his private doubts and struggles to reconcile his public duties with the personal turmoil caused by the revelation. One particularly poignant leak was a confidential letter William wrote to Charles, expressing pain, confusion, and a plea for honesty. The letter's publication sent shockwaves through the public and deepened the perception of a family in crisis. Celebrity commentators and royal experts seized on the leaked letter and other insider accounts, speculating on the long-term impact. Some suggested that William might eventually renounce his claim to the throne, a move that would send the monarchy into uncharted territory. Others believed the prince would instead double down on his role, attempting to redefine monarchy in the 21st century with a focus on service and public engagement, regardless of his biological ties. Amid the media storm, Prince Harry found himself drawn back into the conversation, much to the chagrin of palace officials. His recent attempts to distance himself from royal affairs were overshadowed by renewed interest in his own fraught relationship with the institution. Interview requests and media inquiries flooded in, with many hoping he would comment on William's revelation or use the moment to criticize the palace. Harry's silence in public contrasted sharply with his private activity. Sources close to him revealed that he used the crisis to negotiate new deals with streaming platforms and publishers, capitalizing on public fascination with royal drama. His memoirs and documentaries were said to include candid reflections on his own experiences with family secrets, betrayal, and identity, resonating deeply with the public in light of William's situation. The media coverage also had profound effects on the monarchy's staff and the palace's daily operations. Staff morale plummeted as the scandal dominated headlines and overshadowed other royal initiatives. Security protocols were tightened amid concerns over privacy breaches and potential protests. Internal communications urged discretion and loyalty, but whispers of dissent grew louder. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered, some in support of the royal family, others protesting against what they saw as an outdated institution. Demonstrations were largely peaceful but vocal, with slogans calling for transparency, reform, and accountability. The international ramifications of the media explosion were equally significant. Commonwealth leaders issued cautious statements reaffirming their respect for the monarchy but emphasizing the need for stability and clarity. Behind closed doors, some questioned whether the crisis might accelerate moves toward republicanism, particularly in nations where debates over the monarchy's relevance were already underway. In the financial markets, speculation about the monarchy's future briefly affected shares and businesses linked to royal patronage and tourism. Analysts predicted that a prolonged crisis could impact revenue streams generated by royal events and merchandise, underscoring how deeply intertwined the monarchy was with the British economy and national identity. As the media frenzy intensified, the royal family faced mounting pressure to respond more decisively. The risk of further leaks, damaging revelations, or public backlash grew with each passing day. The palace's initial attempts to control the narrative were no longer enough. They needed a comprehensive, transparent, and strategic approach, one that acknowledged the public's right to know while protecting the monarchy's legacy. Behind closed doors, senior advisors debated the possibility of a televised statement or a carefully crafted interview with Prince William or King Charles. Such a move would be unprecedented but might be necessary to restore public trust and calm the storm. Yet even as plans were discussed, the damage was done. The media explosion had transformed a private family crisis into a national and global spectacle. The DNA revelation was no longer just a question of bloodline. It had become a litmus test for the monarchy's relevance, resilience, and future. The story continued to evolve daily, with new revelations, reactions, and speculations keeping the world captivated. The British monarchy, long seen as an enduring symbol of tradition and stability, found itself at a crossroads, forced to confront uncomfortable truths, reckon with public skepticism, and redefine its place in a rapidly changing world. As the storm of media attention and public outcry swirled around the royal family, Buckingham Palace was thrust into crisis management mode. For decades, the monarchy had relied on carefully crafted public relations strategies to navigate scandals and controversies, but the unprecedented nature of this revelation, Prince William's DNA test results, required a response unlike any before. The palace's senior communications team convened urgently to devise a plan that could contain the damage, reassure the public, and protect the monarchy's fragile image. One of the first steps taken was to release an official statement. The statement acknowledged the situation without confirming or denying specifics, emphasizing the family's commitment to privacy, unity, and duty to the nation. The language was carefully measured, reflecting the palace's desire to appear calm and composed amidst the chaos. Yet, many critics argued the statement was too vague, fueling further speculation and frustration among the public and the press. Behind the scenes, palace officials grappled with competing priorities. On one hand, there was a need to maintain the dignity and secrecy traditionally afforded to the royal family. On the other, there was an increasing demand from the public and media for transparency and honesty. Finding a balance between these was no small feat. A key element of the palace's response was to attempt to discredit some of the leaks and rumors circulating. Anonymous sources within the palace were quoted in off-the-record briefings, portraying certain media accounts as exaggerated or outright false. However, this tactic had mixed results. While it may have sowed doubt among some audiences, it also contributed to perceptions of palace infighting and a lack of cohesion. The palace's communications team also worked to control the narrative by highlighting Prince William's public appearances and philanthropic efforts. By focusing attention on his dedication to charitable causes and his role as a devoted family man, the palace aimed to remind the public of his positive attributes and shift focus away from the scandal. In addition to media management, security measures were intensified. The revelation had heightened concerns about privacy breaches, protests, and even threats to the safety of the royal family. Security personnel increased surveillance, and palace grounds were fortified. Staff were instructed to report any unusual activity immediately. Behind closed doors, private conversations and meetings took place among the highest-ranking royals and advisors. These discussions weighed the possibility of Prince William making a personal statement or even a televised address to the nation. Such a move was considered a double-edged sword. It could humanize William and demonstrate transparency, but it also risked opening the floodgates to further scrutiny and emotional fallout. Simultaneously, the palace sought legal advice to address leaks and potential breaches of confidentiality. Legal teams investigated the sources of unauthorized disclosures and considered actions against media outlets that published sensitive or defamatory material. The palace recognized that restoring control over its internal communications was critical to stemming the tide of damaging revelations. In a bid to rally support, the palace reached out to influential figures within the Church of England, political leaders, and Commonwealth heads of state. Their public statements of loyalty and calls for calm were intended to reinforce the monarchy's legitimacy and appeal to a sense of national unity during a turbulent time. Yet, despite these efforts, cracks began to show within the palace staff and royal circles. The pressure of the scandal took a toll on personal relationships and morale. Insiders described an atmosphere of tension, mistrust, and fatigue. Some senior aides resigned or were quietly reassigned, either voluntarily or at the behest of palace management. To manage internal tensions, palace leadership increased efforts at team-building and morale-boosting activities. However, these gestures could do little to mask the deep divisions that had emerged over how best to handle the crisis and the long-term implications for the monarchy. At the heart of the palace's strategy was an implicit acknowledgement that the traditional model of royal secrecy was no longer sustainable in an age of instant communication and social media. Advisors debated whether the institution needed to modernize its approach radically or risk becoming obsolete. The palace also commissioned independent consultants to assess public sentiment and media trends. These analyses informed the communication strategy, helping tailor messages that would resonate with different segments of the population. Findings revealed a generational divide. Younger Britons were more likely to demand transparency and reform, while older generations tended to prefer discretion and preservation of tradition. In the midst of all this, Prince William himself remained largely out of the public eye. His personal spokesperson emphasized his focus on family and charitable work, projecting an image of resilience. However, close confidants revealed the prince was deeply affected by the revelations and the resulting upheaval. Psychological support was arranged for William and other family members to help them cope with the stress and emotional toll. This level of openness about mental health was another sign of shifting royal protocols, acknowledging that even members of the monarchy needed help in times of crisis. While the palace's response was multifaceted, it was clear that managing the fallout would be a long-term challenge. The scandal had struck at the very core of the royal family's identity, raising existential questions about lineage, legitimacy, and the meaning of monarchy in contemporary society. The coming weeks and months would test the palace's ability to navigate an uncharted course, balancing transparency with privacy, tradition with change, and public expectation with personal grief. Whether the monarchy could emerge from this ordeal intact remained to be seen. As news of the DNA scandal involving Prince William continued to dominate headlines, the public response reached a fever pitch. The British public, long regarded as having a complex but often affectionate relationship with the royal family, now found itself divided. In pubs, workplaces, homes, and on social media, the debate raged on. Conversations that once might have focused on royal weddings or jubilee celebrations were now centered on questions of paternity, legitimacy, and the very future of the monarchy itself. Initial reactions varied widely depending on political views, age groups, class distinctions, and geographic location. Older, more traditional royalists in the countryside were quick to defend Prince William and the institution, emphasizing the values of privacy, dignity, and continuity. Many in this demographic considered the scandal a private matter, one that should not erode public confidence in the monarchy. To them, William was still the same man they had watched grow up after the tragic death of Princess Diana, and they were willing to look past this personal revelation. In contrast, urban areas and younger audiences were less forgiving. A large portion of the public viewed the DNA bombshell as a seismic event demanding transparency and accountability. On university campuses, podcasts, and digital forums, people raised profound ethical and constitutional questions. Could William still ascend the throne if his biological father was not King Charles? Would the monarchy ever fully recover from the damage this revelation caused to its image of divine and dynastic legitimacy? For many young Britons already disenchanted with hereditary privilege, the scandal only confirmed their skepticism. International media outlets picked up the story with relentless fervor. From New York to Nairobi, from Sydney to Stockholm, headlines blared variations of the same shocking revelation. American talk shows, French investigative programs, German political roundtables, all devoted significant airtime to dissecting the scandal. Royal commentators who had once basked in the prestige of covering royal weddings were now elbowing their way into crowded green rooms to offer insights on DNA tests and succession loss. British tabloids, never ones to miss an opportunity for sensationalism, competed aggressively to break the next angle in the unfolding drama. Stories emerged alleging secret meetings, hushed payments, and clandestine attempts by the palace to suppress the truth. Some tabloids even commissioned private investigations, chasing after potential witnesses, former staff, and distant relatives who might shed light on the mystery of William's parentage. The tone of coverage differed sharply across publications. Right-leaning papers often leaned into themes of national unity, urging readers not to be swayed by gossip and innuendo. Left-leaning outlets were more inclined to view the scandal as an indictment of an outmoded institution clinging to power through secrecy. The digital media ecosystem, with its rapid churn of memes, videos, and comment threads, amplified every new revelation with dizzying speed. Hashtags related to the scandal trended globally for days. Not the heir. Diana's Secret, William DNA, and Crisis in the Crown saw millions of shares. On platforms like Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit, users dissected every frame of William's public appearances, searching for signs of emotional strain or coded messages. Conspiracy theories flourished, ranging from wild accusations about MI6 cover-ups to suggestions that the Queen had known all along and orchestrated her own silence to preserve the family's image. The scandal also sparked a wave of documentaries and special reports. Streaming platforms rushed to commission multi-part exposés with titles like The Heir Question, Bloodlines and Betrayal, and Secrets of the Crown. These productions brought together historians, psychologists, and former palace insiders to analyze every aspect of the unfolding crisis. Netflix, which had already profited handsomely from dramatized royal content, found itself in a delicate position as the scandal collided with ongoing relationships it held with royal-adjacent figures like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Within the public, reactions were not just verbal or online. Protesters gathered outside royal residences holding signs that read "Truth before tradition" and "DNA doesn't lie." Some Republicans used the moment to renew their calls for abolishing the monarchy altogether, arguing that a modern democracy had no place for inherited power, especially when that inheritance could be proven uncertain by scientific means. These protests were met with counter-protests by staunch royalists.